My name's Jen Tremont, and I am the Associate Director of Programs for the Atlanta Beltline Partnership. If you are not familiar with us, we are the nonprofit entity for the Atlanta Beltline working to serve that vision, and we do programs like what you're at tonight. This is one of our home empowerment workshops, and these are free workshops we put on with some great partners to teach homeowners and renters about resources that are available to them. And of course, very grateful for our sponsors to help us put those on, Delta, Wells Fargo, PNC Bank, Harry Norman In-Town Office, and Annie Casey Foundation. But of course, very, very grateful for our partners here tonight, Grove Park Foundation and Atlanta Legal Aid, who will be talking to you all things property tax in just a moment. So before we get started, just a couple of logistics, because this is a hybrid event. So we have folks with us here at Paradise Baptist Church in Grove Park. Hello, everyone, and hello to everyone joining us on Zoom. So in just a moment, we'll get started. Throughout, we'll pause for questions, and we'll flow back and forth between our Zoom audience and our in-person audience. We will have a lot of people here tonight and probably a lot of questions, so we'll get to as many as possible. If we don't get to it right away, we'll save time at the end to finalize any questions you may have. The workshop will be recorded and emailed out to you. If you registered, if you didn't, let me know and I'll make sure to get your email so you can get that. Keep in mind, as we go throughout the session, we will have 3 upcoming days where you can get free tax appeal support from one of our volunteers. So if you need more assistance, have additional questions, please register for one of those 3 dates. They'll be the Saturday, July 16th, right around the corner at Allen Temple Church, July 20th at Pittsburgh Yards, or July 27th, which will be virtual. That will get sent out to you as well in the recap email. And for those of you in person, we have flyers with that tonight. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Stacy Reynolds, who is our all things tax expert with Atlanta Legal Aid.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you to our partners, Atlanta Beltline Partnership and Grove Park Foundation. I appreciate everything they do, and I appreciate all of y'all tuning into this. We are trying to figure out a way to help make homes more affordable by trying to control what happens with the property taxes. Our objectives tonight, we basically have 4 parts. The first part, we're going to go into why the assessment matters, how to try and reduce the taxable value and what the assessment actually means. Part 2, we'll dig into how to figure out, how to research the values and assert a value in your appeal. Part 3, we'll be talking about how to submit the tax appeal, looking at the appeal form and a quick overview of how to do it online. And then finally, we'll talk about what to expect after you file for an appeal. This is going to be sort of the timeline of what to expect after the appeal is filed. I'll be answering questions at the end of each of those sections. So try and save your questions for then. You can go ahead and put them in the chat or raise your hand, but we'll try and do them sort of as groups. We don't have a whole lot of time. So I'll also answer questions at the end, but hopefully we'll get to all of them. If you do have specific property, specific questions about your property, it's probably better to sign up for one of the one-on-one consultations to address that rather than trying to do it in this setting. So how do we figure out how to lower your taxes? Really starts with how are the property taxes calculated? The tax assessor comes up with a total value for your property. That's what they've done. That's the notice of assessment. They estimate what they think the fair market value of your home is, and that's the 100% value. You then get taxed on a percentage of that. The taxable amount is 40% of the total value. From that taxable amount, the assessed value, they subtract any exemptions that you're entitled to get, or that you've been approved for. From that, whatever is left over gets multiplied times the millage rate, which is just a fancy word for a tax rate, and you pay whatever amount of tax that results in. So in this calculation of what your taxes are, there are 2 places where you can kind of control how much you have to pay in property taxes. One is you want to try and lower what the tax assessor has as the total value of your home, because that will then lower the assessed value or the taxable value. The other one is you want to increase the exemptions that you're entitled to get. You want to be sure that you're getting all of the exemptions that you're entitled to. That means that there are 2 places where you can try and lower your property taxes. One is the Homestead Exemptions, and the other is property tax appeals. The homestead exemptions is actually sort of my crusade. So it's hard for me to resist talking about that today. We did a presentation back in March. They're going to provide you with a link to that recorded presentation. We will be doing them again this coming probably February, March. Please look out for those, sign up for them. There are a lot of homestead exemptions that I think people don't realize they're eligible to get. Either they just didn't know about them, or in some cases, they've actually been told that they're not allowed to get it because they don't have a deed in their name. And there are some homestead exemptions that you can get even though you don't actually have the deed in your name. So like you're inheriting the home or something like that, definitely look out for the information on homestead exemptions that we put out there. Today, though, we're going to be focusing really on the property tax piece of this, the property tax appeal. And the reason for that is this is your timeline, and this is where we are. Where we are is right smack in the middle of the tax appeal piece of it. You see from the timeline, the deadline for filing for homestead exemptions was April 1st. So if you did not apply for one or try to apply for one by April 1st, it is too late to do that now for an exemption this year. You can still file for them, but you're going to have to wait until next year for it to be implemented. So, if you did apply for an exemption before April 1st, or if you tried to and you should have gotten it and they didn't approve it, you can still appeal that, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But you know, where we are right now is the notice of assessment has come out. You know, when we're doing the timeline, we don't know exactly when that's going to happen. So our timeline sort of gives you an amorphous time. We know now that the assessments came out and the deadline to appeal is on August 1st. So basically from the time the assessments are made available, you have 45 days to appeal. At the end of that 45 days, you lose the right to appeal. So you have to get it filed before the deadline, which again, this year is August 1st. So you can see from this timeline, that deadline is going to come before your tax bill comes out. So by the time you get your tax bill and realize, oh no, I need to pay a lot more in taxes, it's too late to appeal. Now is the time to do it. So that's why you really need to pay attention to the notice of assessment to decide whether or not to appeal now. Then if you do appeal, that tax bill is going to actually be a temporary tax bill. You're still going to need to pay it, but what they're going to do is calculate it based on either last year's value or 85% of the value that's in your notice of assessment, whichever one is lower. So that means that you'll get a bit of a break on the paying the tax bill now, but you do want to save money because it's a temporary tax bill, which means that you're going to get a final tax bill at the end of the process. Once there's a final value from your appeal, they're going to come back and bill for any difference. If it turns out that the value is lower than what the temporary tax bill had, then you'll get a refund. But for most people, the value is going to be at least a little bit higher than last year. So you're probably going to end up having to pay more, which is why it's important to save for that. I'm going to go into a lot of the rest of the sort of tax year timeline later in the presentation, but rest assured that the rest of the thing is sort of processing your appeal. I do want to go back to the beginning of this. So January 1st is sort of the key date when we're talking about the necessary ownership interest or age to be able to get the homestead exemptions. It's also the date that they're sort of guessing what your home is worth for. So they're going to look at what was your home worth as of January 1st. That means that any sales that are being used to estimate what your home is worth are going to be last year's sales. So any sales that happened this year really are not going to be factored into it. So we'll talk more about this when we're digging into the research, but that's why the January 1st date is a really important one. Okay, so I said I'm not going to talk about exemptions. There is one exemption I want to talk about, the floating exemption. And so a lot of people don't really understand what the floating exemption is. It is the same thing as a value cap. Basically, what they did is said, when you get a homestead exemption, you can lock in a base year. And that base year is going to be your taxable value, and it can only go up no more than 3%. And so each year, that means that you're going to be having a more steady increase instead of these giant jumps in value. That's true of the categories where there is a homestead, a floating exemption. One thing I actually was confused about how, when I look at a tax bill, it doesn't show that value cap. And so I had to actually do the math to confirm that in fact, what they do is they take that difference, the amount that your value has gone up above the amount that is allowed to be the taxable amount, and they lump that into your exemption on top of any existing exemptions you have. So in this example, we had an existing exemption of 50,000. They added that difference between the value capped amount and the assessed value to that 50,000. And so that's how they get the exemption amount. So in this example, the total net assessment that's going to be multiplied by the tax rate to get the amount of taxes you pay is only $1,500. So you can see how that can make a huge difference in your tax bill, but it doesn't apply to all your categories of taxes. The main one it does not apply to is school taxes. The Atlanta school taxes, the maximum low-income senior exemption is only going to be $75,000. It doesn't take into account what the value was last year or any prior year. It's just that is the maximum exemption you're going to be able to get. So as the total value goes up, the assessed value goes up, and that means that the amount that's you're being taxed on is going to go up. So all they're going to do is subtract out the 75,000. So in this example, the way we have it set up is last year was the base year. Last year, the taxable value was 50,000. This year, it's increased, and this year the assessed value is 100,000. So that means that Atlanta school taxes are going to start with that 100,000, subtract the 50,000, the 75,000, and that's going to give them, the amount that gets taxed, and that's 25,000 instead of 1,500. So, and then that gets multiplied times the millage rate. And so this person is going to have to pay over $500 in school taxes this year, even though they're a low-income senior. And with this example, last year's value was 50,000, or taxable value was 50,000. That means that they paid zero in school taxes last year because it's below the $75,000 exemption that they had. So that's going to be a huge jump just caused by the increase in the value. So that's why it's really important to appeal the value, even though you have the floating exemption for a big chunk of your tax bill. You got your notice of assessment. Let's talk about the key things to look at when you're thinking about doing a tax appeal. The first one is the date. It's going to give you the notice date, the date that they made it available, and the deadline for appealing. Again, this year is August 1st. So you want to pay attention to that date on that notice. That is the last day that you can file your appeal. You want to look at the exemption status. If you apply for an exemption before April 1st and it's not showing up here, you want to appeal that. It may be that they're still just processing your application, but this is your chance to appeal it. If it turns out that it is just being processed and that you get approved, you can withdraw that appeal. You don't have to pursue it. But you want to go ahead and appeal it if it's not showing up here. So if it says no for the homestead exemption and you apply for an exemption, you want to appeal. If it says yes, and you applied for it like a senior exemption or some other exemption other than just the basic, then you want to look for a code that's something other than HF01. HF01 is going to be the basic exemption. And so it's going to, any of the other exemptions are going to have some other code to them. HF49 something. It's hard to tell what the different codes mean. So you may want to call the assessor's office to ask what that code means to make sure that you're getting the exemptions that you applied to get. If you're not, again, you're going to appeal. You want to look at the values. They give you last year's value and this year's value. And so if there's a big increase, you want to think about appealing that. They also give you an estimated tax. This is just an estimate. It says very clearly it's not a bill. This is not necessarily what you're going to see on your tax bill. But this is a pretty good guess of what the increase in value is going to do to your taxes. So what they do is they use last year's tax bill, last year's millage rates, and the value that they've got, the new value that they're proposing in this notice of assessment, and they estimate what your taxes are going to be. If there's a big jump from last year's tax bill to what you see in this estimate, you want to think about appealing that. A couple other things I want to point out on here, because they're going to come in handy when you start filing your appeal, is the property ID number. It's also called a parcel ID number. That's going to be a number that you're going to need to enter on the appeal. And then also the neighborhood code in DHD is just neighborhood. And then the code it's a 4 to 5, maybe a 6-digit number that basically breaks the county down into individual neighborhoods that don't necessarily correspond with what you think of as your neighborhood. And what you wanted, the reason you want to pay attention to that is that when we're talking about comparing other houses that are in your neighborhood, it's the neighborhood code that you really want to look for. Now, if you're on the edge and it makes more sense to be in a different neighborhood, you can argue that you should be able to compare it to some of these other neighborhoods. But for the most part, you want to try and stick with that neighborhood code when you're looking at comparable homes. There are 3 grounds for appeal. The first is uniformity. And that's basically, you're talking about, what did the assessor say other homes that are similar to yours, what were the values of those other homes? And if it looks like there are other homes that are similar to yours that are valued lower than yours, that's not fair. That means that you're being taxed differently, and it's not uniform. And so, basically, you want to argue that, look, my house is similar to these houses that are assessed lower. I should be assessed closer to that value. So you need to lower my value based on uniformity. And again, that's going to be based on what the assessor says that these homes are worth this year. The second ground is value, and that actually breaks into 2 pieces. So a value appeal based on condition is based on the condition of your home. They're looking at the values countywide. They have not been to your home, at least for most people anyways. So they don't know what condition your home is in. And if the condition of your home would speak to a lower value, that's a value appeal, not uniformity. The other piece of value is sales. So if you're going to say that that there were sales in your neighborhood that would speak to a lower value, that would justify a lower value for your home, then you want to say that it's a value appeal that's based on sales. Again, these are sales from last year. The third ground for appeal is exemption denied. Again, if you applied for an exemption before April 1st and it's not showing up and you think you're eligible for it, then you need to appeal that. Also, if you tried to apply for an exemption and they didn't allow you to apply for it and it's something you're eligible for, you can still appeal that as well. So those are the 3 grounds for appeal. And those are the things you want to be thinking about. Which of these categories should I be appealing under? You can do all 3. You can do one or another, 1, 2, 3, however many you want. But these are the 3 that you're going to be looking at. When you got your notice of assessment, you may have also gotten this, pretty multicolored flyer from the county that goes through and talks something about the taxes and things like that. And I just want to draw your attention to one block on it, because I think that it helps us frame what we're thinking about when we're talking about appealing. The first one is that they point out that Georgia law requires that Fulton County assess the property annually at fair market value. And that's true. But unless your home was sold last year, you don't know what that fair market value is. They're just guessing at it. Now they're doing an educated guess. They do have a lot of data and analytics to try and come up with that number, but they don't know your house. So the fair market value for your house may not be what they think it is. When they're trying to establish the property's value, they're going to be looking at the size of land and buildings, the age, materials, features, the location, condition, any improvements on the property, and sales from other comparable homes. So These are all the things that you want to think about when you're talking about trying to challenge the value. These are the things they're looking at. These are also the things that you can use to argue for a lower value. The final thing they have on this little block is that as the real estate market trends up, so do your values. But these are trends. Just because the trends are going up doesn't mean your value is going up, and it doesn't mean that your value should go up as much as they say it is. So these are all things that you want to think about when you're trying to frame the appeal. So tax appeals. This is your chance to argue for a lower taxable value, or to show that you're eligible for a homestead exemption. So by arguing for a lower total value, it's going to lower your taxable value. So you want to have an argument for that. And if you're eligible for a homestead exemption, then you're going to want to be able to show that you're eligible for that homestead exemption that you applied for and didn't get. The appeal has to be filed within 45 days of when the notice of assessment is made available. This does change every year. This year, that date is August 1st. I will keep saying that. August 1st is your deadline. If you file your appeal and see it through to the Board of Equalization, you will get a 3-year freeze. What that means is that for the tax year that you're appealing and the 2 following years, you are not going to see an increase unless you redo the house or something like that. You're not going to get an increase. So that in itself can be a win. Even if you end up with the final value being the same as what was on your notice of assessment, at least you know that next year and the year after, you're not going to have an increase. Hopefully you'll get a decrease too, and then that will get locked in for the following 2 years as well. Board of Equalization is not scary. I can't tell you how many people I just decide they want to sacrifice that 3-year freeze because they're afraid to do the Board of Equalization hearing. They hear the word hearing and they think that it's going to be, scary judge, rules of evidence, that sort of thing. It's a very informal hearing. The Board of Equalization is actually just 3 taxpayers like you that have been selected to serve on these boards. They get a little bit of training, but for the most part, they have the same concerns that you do as a taxpayer in the county. So, they're somewhat sympathetic to what you're going through. Their role is to listen to your argument and the appraiser's argument, and then decide what they think the value should be. So it's just, they're typically not lawyers involved. You don't have to have a lawyer. You can do this yourself. You do need to present evidence that supports a lower value, though. You shouldn't go into the Board of Equalization and say, I can't afford my taxes. That's not going to be enough. You need to provide them something to hang their hat on to lower the value. You need to show them that you need to correct the information about your home, and that would lower the value. Or you need to bring in some comparable homes that allow you to argue for a lower value. Some sort of comparison homes that are similar to yours, but have would make the case for it being a lower value for your home. So what is it we're talking about? So this is a graphic that I actually found on Facebook, and I apologize, I can't find who to attribute it to, but I thought it's a good illustration of what we're talking about. Basically, what you need to do in your appeal is present evidence that supports the value that you think the home is, as opposed to the giant mansion that they think the house is. And so, basically you want to be trying to think about what information can you show to show that your home is not worth as much as they're saying. Okay, so that's the end of the part 1 and what things you need to think about for appealing and how to read the notice of assessment. Before I get into where to dig for the information to help with your appeal, let me stop and see if there are any questions.
Yes, we have a couple. And for those on Zoom, our lovely Zoom responder Carrie is answering questions. So please go through and read those responses as well. I'm going to do a couple Zoom and then I'll get to you guys in person. So if on the assessment it says a CPI frozen, is that same as a capped value?
Yes. Yeah, so the CPI frozen is a floating exemption. What that means is that it can only go up as much as the consumer price index goes up. I use the sort of shorthand of no more than 3% because it's either the CPI amount or 3%. So if the consumer price index were over 3%, it would be capped at 3%. For the most part, it's been lower, and that is the floating exemption.
So there's a couple questions that are coming up about comps, which I know you will get to in a second. So there's one question that says, is there a website where you can view current home sales and values from the previous year that's easily accessible? The answer is yes, it is the Fulton Assessor's Tax website, and we will get into that in detail. Stacey will in a moment.
That is the next section.
That is the next section. Oh, wow, we're getting a lot of questions pop up. I will pause for a moment and take any in-person questions. Okay.
Yeah.
When I present the information about my house, does it have to be, can I put the interior pictures also, or it's just exterior?
So I'm going to repeat the question for our Zoom folks. So the question was, when you present the evidence, if you can have interior pictures or just exterior. Stacey, I'll let you take that one.
Actually, interior pictures are great. And the reason is that for the most part, the assessors haven't been in your house. They have no idea what the condition of your house is inside. And so bringing in pictures of the conditions inside helps to give a better picture of what your home is worth. You know, if someone were to buy your home, they would come into your home and look at it. They don't just, you know, drive by the outside and say, oh, well, I think this is what I'll pay for it. So the interior pictures are great. Exterior are also good if you have any conditions on the outside that are worth noting. The pictures in general are a good idea.
So there's quite a few questions coming in from Zoom that are very specific to the different arguments, and that will be the next section that we'll go into. So I will pause on those. Hopefully they will all get answered. But one referring back to the first part, Stacey, is can you do multiple appeals at once? Meaning you can appeal for multiple reasons at one time.
Yes, and in fact, you want to appeal for all the reasons that apply. So you want to check all three if all three of them apply. You know, or, you know, if it's just one or two of them, do the one or two. But yeah, you can definitely do all of them at once. I'll talk about a little hiccup on how to do the homestead exemption one when we get into the part about filing your appeal. But yes, definitely you can appeal all the different categories at once.
Perfect. Someone did ask if it was being recorded, and it is, and will be distributed to you after the session. Yes. Oh, yes. Anyone that missed that, it will be recorded. You'll get a follow-up email with all this information and more information about the consultation sessions if you want more help. Most of the other questions, Stacey, are what you'll be talking about in this next part, so I will pause those because I believe you'll answer a lot of them.
Okay. So the next part is we're going to talk about where to dig for the information. And there really is just a wealth of information on the fultonassessor.org website. They have so much right there available for free, and they actually make it somewhat easy to search. And so, you know, I highly recommend using that, which is why I'm going to walk through a good bit of detail about using that. And talking about the different kinds of appeals, there is some little differences in how you approach the research when you're talking about a value appeal versus a uniformity appeal. So I'm going to talk about those kind of separately. But the first thing you want to do is you want to start with looking to see what they have about your home. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to the fultonassessor.org website. You're going to look for the quick links, and it has the property search. When you click on that, it's going to come up with this search screen, and you have a choice of different methods to be able to search for the property. When you're talking about searching for your home, you don't want to do the advanced search. Advanced search is a great tool for when you're searching for multiple properties. So I'm going to talk about that more when we get into the more in-depth research. But when you're looking for your home or an individual parcel, what you want to do is search by owner name, by parcel ID number or property ID number, or by address. I will say that their search things are a little persnickety, so you may have to try a couple different things to make sure that it comes up. For example, if you live on like McDonough, it's going to, the way they spell McDonough is going to be MC space D. So, there are little quirks to how they do it. But if you try, you can ultimately find your home. When you pull up your home, it's going to have this screen, this profile that's going to have, your parcel ID number, your street address, the neighborhood code. That's the profile page. There are a whole bunch of other pages. So what you want to do is you want to click through all of these different tabs on the left-hand side and see what it is they have about your home. Now, the other great thing they have on this is that this is where you can actually find your notice of assessment. So if you didn't receive the notice of assessment already, you can go in, search for your home, go to this right-hand side, click on the 2002 real estate notice, go, and it'll download the assessment so you can actually have the assessment there. All the information that's in the notice of assessment is going to be in the tabs that are here on the left, except for that estimated tax bill piece of it. All the rest of it, all the values and neighborhood code, all that stuff, that's all going to be in these tabs, as well as a wealth of other information. For example, if you click on the residential tab, that's where it's going to show the information about your home. So again, that's going to be a really important one for purposes of looking at the information they have about your home. You want to look at the year built. You want to look at the square footage. The living area is the square footage. You want to be sure to pay attention to how many bedrooms and bathrooms they have. The grade, where on this one it's D+, that's based on the quality of construction and materials and design and things like that. So, that can vary. The CDU is condition, desirability, and utility. That's going to be kind of anywhere from, uninhabitable, very poor, poor, fair, good, very good, excellent. So, it's a whole range of different CDUs, and that can vary, and those are things that affect the value. So you want to look through this whole thing, look to see what the information they have is correct about your property. Think about whether it's accurate. Look at the square footage. If the square footage is overstated by at least 300 square feet, then that's going to be worth appealing. Quality of construction, the CDU, particularly if there's damage, especially water or structural damage, that can cause the call for a lower CDU, which again lowers the total value that the assessor has for your home. Accessory buildings are very important. If, let's say there was a garage and it got torn down, but they're still showing that you have that garage, that can make a big difference in the value. So you want to check to see what they say about accessory buildings. You want to look to see what they say about the heating and air, the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, finished basement, any of this stuff. If any of this stuff is not accurate, you want to think about this being a value appeal. Again, that's a value appeal based on condition. While you're going through this information about your home, you want to gather the information about your home so that you can then compare that to other homes, because that's going to help you figure out what is similar to your home. So what is similar? If you live in a home where all the homes are the same, that's pretty easy. I mean, that's clearly similar. But, most of us don't live in those neighborhoods. Most of us live in neighborhoods where there's a bunch of infill housing or, just different generations of housing. You end up in a house, living in a neighborhood where the houses are very different. And there's no way to argue that, the small house, shotgun house is going to be the same as the new modern mansion. They're not equal. But you might be able to make an argument about how to compare them by looking at the price per square foot. So what you want to do is you want to take the value of the home divided by the square footage of the home, and then compare that to the same for yours. So that's a way to be able to say, yeah, this was a much bigger house, but if you look at the price per square foot that they have for that house, my house wouldn't sell for that much. And so it's a kind of a way to make apples and oranges a little bit more like apples to apples. So again, the way you approach value research versus uniformity research is a little bit different. So we're going to go into those separately. Value research is going to be looking for sales in the prior year. So again, value appeal is either condition, in which case your research is basically what is going on with your house, or based on sales. And so when you're doing the actual research outside of your house, that's going to be looking at what the sales in the neighborhood were for the prior year. So we're going to look at 2021 sales. The advanced search, this is where the advanced search really comes in handy. It actually has a great search method. You do that, you click on the criteria, it comes up with this drop-down menu, and you can select different criteria to search by. So you want to start with your neighborhood code and the sales date. So you put in your neighborhood code, as well as the sales date for all of 2021. So you can get the range to capture all the sales from 2021. And that's going to allow you to pull up all the sales in your neighborhood for last year. That answers that question. Sometimes the number of sales will be more than what you can actually show. It'll only come up with, I think, 250 entries. If that happens, you may need to add other criteria just to limit it a little bit more. But you kind of play around with that to try and see what the things are. Once you have the search down, it's going to come up with a list of the sales. And you can just work with that list as it is. Click on the line, it'll take you to the property information for that property, and you can look at it, see if it's similar to yours, see what the details are. Or one of the things that I sometimes do to help me figure out which ones to click on is I'll click on the show and results, and I'll add the sales price and square footage as two of my criteria. I do a really wide range. I don't want to exclude good comps, but it'll allow me to pull up the sales, and also have that sales price and square footage so that I can sort of do the price per square foot in my head. The other thing, and this is actually the greatest thing I think on using the advanced search in the Fulton system, is that you can actually export this to a spreadsheet. You can do select all, click on attribute export and go, and it'll actually download it to a spreadsheet. And the truly remarkable thing is that the spreadsheet that you get when you do that is actually a whole lot more information than what you would see on the screen when you're looking at the results just on the computer. It actually will give you, the year built, the square footage, the bedrooms, bathrooms. It gives you all sorts of information that you can sort of use just eyeballing to figure out which of these houses are similar to mine and which ones aren't. The other great thing is with a spreadsheet, you can add a column where it can actually calculate that price per square foot for you, and makes it a lot easier to pinpoint which properties you want to look at. So that can make your search go a lot faster. Another way to do the search is to use the map. So when you're at your property, click on the tab for map. It's going to bring up a map of your property and some other surrounding properties. And basically you can just click on any of the other properties around yours, and it'll come up with some information in this little box. And if you just click on the sales tab in that little box, it'll actually show you what recent sale information they have. And you can look for a home that has a 2021 sale and what that sale price is. If you want to get more information on that property, all you have to do is click on the parcel ID number here, and that'll pull up the parcel ID, the property information for that property, and you can compare the information it has about your property to that property. So that's a little, it's not as, one-stop shop, but it can be fun to kind of click around and see what's out there. So that's how you do the value search. The uniformity, what you're trying to look for is what is it that the assessors have for the value for the current year for other properties. So basically you're going to be looking at other properties and what their notice of assessment said, and looking for Easter eggs. Well, you're trying to find those sort of undervalued properties in your neighborhood to be able to compare your property to. And this is where doing the map can be a lot of fun because it really is like searching for Easter. Basically, you just click around on the different properties, look at the values that they have for the other properties, and just hope for that Easter egg to pop out of one of them. It does take, you know, some digging through and luck, but you can find it. You can also do an advanced search. And again, the advanced search, you can do everything that I said before, as far as, you know, doing it as a exporting it to an Excel spreadsheet and all that stuff. But your approach to doing the advanced search for the uniformity argument is a little bit different. You want to, in your criteria, you want to use the neighborhood code, but you do not want to use the sales date. You don't want to narrow that sales date because you want to look at any properties, not just the ones that were sold last year. So with that, you're probably going to need to add some other criteria to be able to get it down to that 250 item limit. And if you're going to export it, you may have to get it down even farther. So the common ones that I use are things like the appraised value, square footage, and year built, and try and do it as a pretty broad range that would get anything that's similar to my property. In addition to the stuff that you can find on the Fulton Assessor website, you can also do you know, recent appraisals. If you have an appraisal that shows that there is different information about your home, like the square footage, you can use that. Or especially if you have an appraisal that shows a lower value than what they have, then you can definitely use that. And the if you have a recent appraisal that's higher, you don't have to present that. You only want to use this if it's going to support a lower value. We've already talked a little bit about the photographs, but they're definitely a great way of showing what conditions are in your home that are not visible from the street. And this, especially if you have any sort of damage or deterioration of the property, you want to get a picture of that and bring that to the Board of Equalization. You know, it has a tremendous effect on the board members when they see the things that are happening in the home. And that definitely affects the value. You also can bring repair estimates. You know, if you were to sell your home and the buyer says you needed, you know, to have these windows replaced or that roof replaced or whatever, they're going to subtract the amount that it would cost to do those repairs. So you can bring the repair estimate and argue for subtracting those from the value. Google Street View and other internet searches can also be very helpful when you're looking at other sales. You know, a lot of times the homes that are being sold after they've been renovated and updated and all that. And so you can show that, you know, yeah, this home sold down the street from me for more than what you got for mine, but it had all these improvements and mine doesn't have that. You know, or especially Google Street View can be great for this. Let's say you live down the street from someone who flipped the house. So, you know, let's say it's a bungalow that was sold as is, and somebody came in, you know, greatly expanded it, maybe made it multiplex, changed it dramatically, made it a much more expensive home, and then sold it. Especially if that happened in the same year, a lot of times that's going to end up being you know, the second sale is going to be what's used to figure out values rather than that first one. But you can use Google Street View, you know, if you happen to have it, if it happens to have a picture of that earlier, smaller bungalow that looks a lot more like your house, and you know what it looks like now, then you can use that to show that actually this first sale was more like my home. This is a you know, a truer representation of the fair market value of my home. So those can be really useful. Also, just really want to mention that there is another website that you can use to look for this stuff. It's called Q Public. The Schneider Corporation does it. I usually actually include slides about that website as well, because some pieces of it are very helpful. But the recent changes have been that they don't get the updated information about the new assessments right away, since it's no longer the official website for Fulton County. And so some of the information is a little bit dated, and they no longer make it easy to find. So you can go to Q Public and put in the state and the county and pull it up. So it's another place that you can look for information, but you just want to be a little bit cautious of it.
And Stacy, I'm just gonna ask a quick question. Where can you find neighborhood boundaries by the neighborhood codes? I'm not sure I've seen a map of that. I always just look for it on the like the property
Map?
page on Fulton Assessors as opposed to on any kind of map.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know, and that may be something you could do by open records requests is find out, what the neighborhood code boundaries are. Because the interesting thing is that there are some neighborhoods that actually have different neighborhood codes interspersed. I know I ran into that problem with an old Fourth Ward case where what they did is they sort of tried to carve out some of the existing bungalows that were there versus the multiplex and other things that are going into that neighborhood. And so a lot of what I do, especially if I'm using the map that I'm searching, I actually will just click on the different ones and look at the neighborhood codes for each of the parcels as I'm looking at it, and look for the ones that are the same neighborhood code as my clients. I don't have a great answer for that one.
Thanks.
Some other words of caution: beware of frozen values. So when you're doing the uniformity search, you're going to be looking at what the assessor has for the value for the home. But you want to be careful that the value that they have for this year may actually be based on a appeal from the last 2 years. So you want to be sure that you're not trying to present something that's from an appeal as a value for this year, because technically it's a value from the year of the appeal. So you just want to be careful of that. There are two ways to look for that. You can either, when you're looking at the values history, if there's a number of years that are the same, you can be a little bit suspicious there's an appeal. There's also an appeals history tab that will allow you to look to see if they did appeal in the last 2 years. Sorry. You also want to avoid uninhabitable properties unless your property is also uninhabitable. A lot of times you look for the lowest value you can find, but sometimes those lowest values are going to be homes that are falling in. And so, the Board of Equalization isn't going to be very persuaded that your home should be valued the same as a home that's falling in. Try to use valid or qualified sales, or if you want to use one that's not marked as valid or qualified, then be ready to justify it. What this means is when you're looking at the sales tab, it talks about, it gives you the sale amount. Below that is actually going to say, some sort of description of the sale. Sometimes it'll say valid sale, and that's going to be where it's very clearly a transaction between two unrelated parties, a motivated buyer and a motivated seller who've reached an agreement on a value. They may have other things down there, things like renovated after purchase. That means that it's not going to be qualified to be a value for that home for the following year, but it doesn't mean that it's not a valid sale. It still could be between two unrelated parties for a fair market value based on what the condition was at that time. So you might be able to justify using that even though it doesn't say valid sale. But if you can find one that says valid sale that supports the value, the lower value, you want to try and use those. Keep in mind, again, that affordability is not a ground for lowering the value. So you do want to try and find something to hang your hat on in the comps that are out there or in the condition of your home to be able to support that value. So that's it for this piece of it. Are there questions? I know this is kind of the hardest one to get around.
Yeah, we've got a few. I answered some, and we've got, I forgot I didn't have my video on. And we've got a few more, just in some big categories that we've seen before. So somebody asked, let's say you appeal it, you've got the frozen value, and then the market value drops, and you're still in the midst of those frozen values.
So yeah, if you're in the midst of the frozen value and the value drops, that is a risk. And in theory, they don't have to lower it. Sometimes they will lower it, even though it was frozen. You know, you can appeal if you think that actually the value should be lower. You can appeal again, and that will unfreeze the property. But it does mean that there's a danger that they'll end up going with a higher value. That's, you know, that's one of the few categories where you'll end up with a higher value than what's on your notice of assessment.
Okay, there's one also that hung on from homestead exemption. Can a trust ownership qualify for a homestead exemption? I couldn't remember.
Yes. The property is in a trust and the person living in the home is the beneficiary under the trust, they can get the homestead exemption.
Perfect. We've got a couple of sales related ones. One person said they're considering sale of their home. Will appealing affect that? Should they, you know, my assumption is that they're thinking in terms of the value of the home that they can sell.
Yeah, and that's when you're arguing with the assessor's office to try and lower the value, you're not arguing against yourself for selling it. What you're doing is you're trying to convince them that taxable value should be lower. If somebody is interested in buying your house, they're going to look at what the market has and what they're willing to pay. They're not going to be looking at what the assessor says the value is for the home.
Okay. And a couple other related to buying a new home. There were a couple anonymous questions about it being the second year in the home, so presumably they bought last year. The value is the value or close to the value that they bought it for. Should they appeal to lock in that rate? Should they appeal? Would that be bad? What should they do?
Yeah, so if you bought the house last year, then basically, if you bought the house last year and it was a fair market sale, you know, arm's length transaction between unrelated parties, then basically what you've done is you've established the fair market value for that home for that year. There is a statute that says that the assessment for this year should be the sale price from last year. If they are showing a lower value, you probably don't want to push that, because if you appeal, then what they can say is, oh, well, we should just go with that sale value. If you want to appeal it just to lock it in, it may not do that. The statute that requires them to do the last year's sale value as the value for this year is separate from the one that allows for the 3-year freeze. And so it's not clear that you would get that freeze even if you appealed it. So.
Okay. Well, then a couple of more like in-depth, like not in-depth, but brief questions, but about small things. Are they only including, or should we be only including square footage that is conditioned when calculating value?
So if you look at the information they have about your home, the living area is going to be the main thing you're going to be looking at. And so that's going to be primarily the air conditioned, you know, portion of the home. So they should have a separate thing for, like, you know, an unfinished basement or something like that. So you're really looking at the living area as the square footage.
And okay, so I'm trying to get through the ones that I think are good to answer live pretty quickly. Can an appeal cause an increase in your taxes?
Unless you're in the case where you purchased the home last year and you appeal, then, okay, so if you purchased last year and you appeal, you do run the risk of it going above what's in the assessed value if the sales amount was more than the assessed value. If you are not in that category, there is a statute that says that they will not go above the notice of assessment value in the appeal. So, you know, if you keep it, if you're appealing without having had the sale, and if you haven't appealed in the last 3 years, then they're stuck with that notice of assessment value, even if the value really should be higher. So, yeah. So the answer is basically no, unless you're in those categories.
Great. Let's see. Do you know what a binding ARB final value on appeal is?
So one of the categories, and we're going to talk about this a little bit in a minute, but one of the categories for where to have your appeal is you can do it and the arbitrator makes a decision, and that's going to be binding in the same way that the Board of Equalization is going to freeze the value.
Okay. Yeah, and this person's not seeing the value frozen for 3 years, so.
We actually have a couple of comments on Facebook Live about that too,
Okay.
about the conditions for the 3-year freeze and what to do if that's not being reflected in this year's assessment.
Yeah, so you should get the freeze as long as you've seen the appeal all the way through to the Board of Equalization, or got in writing an agreement that included that freeze. You should have that freeze just by virtue of having done the appeal and gotten that far. If your notice of assessment is not reflecting that freeze, it could be that it's just that, if you've recently had your hearing, they just haven't updated their system yet. It could also be a mistake in the data entry. So what you want to do, if your notice of assessment does not reflect the freeze, then go ahead and call the appraiser and try and confirm that they're going to correct that. Because if they don't correct it, you do want to appeal it, just limited to the argument that it should have that freeze, and so the value should be what you got in your prior appeal. But it's a lot easier to just get them to agree that that value should have gotten frozen.
I'm gonna take a shift and answer some in-person questions if anyone has any. Yes, and I'm gonna repeat them for our Zoom people to see.
When you're trying to get the estimate for the home, you actually have to get a professional to come in and do the estimate, or you can have like Google.
So this question is if you wanted to get estimates for repairs for that appeal argument, if you need to get a professional to give those quotes, or if you can do some online research.
Having an estimate from a professional is probably better evidence, but you can certainly, if you can't, especially if it's the kind of thing that you would have to pay someone to come out and give you an estimate, you can do some online research and get a range of what you think the cost would be. Just keep in mind that you're trying to convince the Board of Equalization that this is really what it would cost. So whatever you think is going to convince someone that should be subtracted.
Any other? So there are a few specific homestead exemption questions, both on Zoom and in person. I will get to those at the end, just so we can cover all the property tax appeal ones, but I will get to you guys.
Can that freeze be removed, or do you need to start all over again?
So if I heard your question correctly, it's if you have the freeze and then pretty much, I guess, how to renew it once it comes out of that 3-year freeze, and what you would do at the end.
Yeah, so basically, the people who appealed in 2019, they got the freeze for 2019, 2020, and 2021. They got their notice assessment this year, and they probably saw a big increase, because basically it's 3 years of increase wrapped into one. You want to appeal again, and just keep appealing. As long as you can justify a lower value, it's worth it to keep appealing and getting that freeze and keeping it from going up as quickly as some of them do.
Basically, just keep coming back to us and we'll keep helping you with the appeal process. Any additional in-person questions? All right, Carrie, were there any additional on Zoom before we move on? Oh, just one second. There's some in-person.
Is it true that you have to have multiple examples of, let's say, on the basis, let's say I want to appeal on the basis of informative. So the minimum is 3, or can I have just 2? Because sometimes it's hard to find multiple.
Sure. So Stacy, the question was pretty much how many examples do you need for your appeal? Because sometimes it can be difficult to find, 3 or more.
Yeah, and the appraiser is usually going to have 4 or 5 examples. ideally that's what you want, but if you don't have that, it's fine to go in with even just one. Basically what you want to do is find one really solid example and show that to the Board of Equalization. If you find more than that, that's better. You want to try and present as much evidence as you can, but without overwhelming them. But sometimes there just isn't a lot out there.
Yes, sir.
Okay, 2 questions.
Yes.
First question, residential. After a successful appeal and my taxes are adjusted for, is it 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
Can I reapply?
So after a successful appeal and you're frozen for 3 years, can you reapply? And you can you can apply at the end of, or appeal again at the end of your freeze. I think we can go ahead and answer your homestead exemption question now, because I think that's where we're going. So the question, Stacy, for the homestead exemption, and you can answer this briefly because we do have a full recording that I'll send you, is if you have to apply every 3 years, or just reapply for the homestead exemption once you have it.
Yeah, so some of you may have seen there was a news story earlier this year about a woman who lost her exemption because it expired after 2 years. There is one low-income senior exemption that expires every 2 years in Fulton County. That is the only one that expires. All the rest of them continue and until your eligibility changes. You do want to go back and reapply if you become eligible for additional exemptions, because you want to be sure that you're getting all the exemptions that you're entitled to get. And they're not going to just automatically know that, now you've turned 65. And so even though you have a 62, you should be getting the 65. They're not going to know that. You have to go in and apply as you change. And I definitely recommend looking at that video, because I walked through all the different exemptions and talk about this in a lot more detail.
Yes, we have a whole other hour that we talk about that, so I'll make sure you get that too. And what was your second question?
Second question, I have land,
Mm-hmm.
and the value is still astronomical. Can I appeal that? I mean, how can land go up 10 times its value in 3 years?
Is it a vacant lot, and is it zoned residential?
Residential vacant lot.
Okay, the question is about if you can appeal a residential vacant lot.
Yeah, you can appeal, really, you can appeal any parcel and residential or commercial, but what we're talking about is all just residential. And yes, you can appeal things whether you have a home or not, whether you have homestead exemption or not. Any property is subject to an appeal.
And I assume, Stacey, you would use the same process of finding comps for the vacant lots as well.
In that case, you do want to look at other vacant lots to be able to compare the values.
Yeah, again, that apples to apples. So, you're welcome. All right. We can
I
move.
just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Did I understand? Do I understand well? And so the senior exemption expires every 2 years?
There's just one that you have to reapply for, and it's very specific. And I'll send you the information that goes through all of the homestead exemption information in depth, because that deadline's not until April 1st. So there's time.
And I will say, I do just want to say on the expiring thing, just call every year and ask them, are you eligible for additional exemptions? And they should be able to walk through your situation and look at what you're getting and help you figure out if you're eligible for additional exemptions.
But now there's that one which is regardless of your financial situation, just based on age. So I mean, they don't think I'm getting any younger every 2 years.
Stacey, would just repeat the requirements for that one that you have to reapply for.
The one you have to reapply for is a low income age 65 exemption. So between 65 and 70, you have to reapply every 2 years. It does have an income requirement, and that's why you have to be able to show that you still meet the requirements for income. Obviously, you're not going to get any younger. There is also an exemption for people who are 65 or older without an income requirement. And that one you don't have to reapply for.
Perfect. All right.
And there's some other low income senior exemptions that you'll qualify for, that you may qualify for, that don't require the renewal. It's just that one that causes a problem.
All right, let's go on to part 3. And again, we'll have time for questions at the end. And if we run over the allotted time, we can stay and answer a couple extra questions.
Okay. So part 3, we're going to talk about submitting the appeal. So you've done the research. Hopefully you've gotten an idea of what the value is that you think you can reasonably justify that's lower than what they have on their notice of assessment. So what do you do with that? Keep in mind the deadline is August 1st. So if you don't have the research done, you still need to get it filed by August 1st. So you want to be sure that whatever you're planning to do, it's done by August 1st, or else you've lost your right to appeal. That said, there are 3 places that you can appeal. One is online. This is the one, it's the most common one, and it's I think it's the best one because you get a confirmation as soon as you've submitted the appeal. You get confirmation that it actually has been submitted. You can save that and have proof that you actually did appeal. So it's great. You can also send in the appeal by mail. With this, you want to be able to confirm that you actually did submit it by the deadline and they received it. So you want to send it in a way that's going to be able to verify both things, especially if you're sending it by mail somewhere close to that August 1st deadline. Keep in mind that if you take it to the post office on August 1st, it may not get an August 1st postmark, and it has to have a postmark on or before August 1st to be considered timely filed. If it's going to be received by that date, it's less important to prove the date that you sent it, but you want to be sure that you can prove that it was sent by the deadline and received by them so that you know that you've got a valid appeal. You can also appeal in person. Basically, you're going to take a paper appeal form or a letter and take it into the tax assessor's office, and their main office is the one that you use for the mailing address, or you can do it at any of the annexes. So these are all the offices that you could walk into and file your appeal. They'll probably have the forms on hand, but I recommend that you do the form ahead of time and bring it in. Even if you're doing it in person, you want to be sure that you get confirmation that it was received. So try and get a file stamped copy that shows that it was received by a certain date, so that you can show that you actually did file it before the deadline. In order to locate the appeal form, either online or the paper appeal form, again, you want to go to the fultonassessor.org website. You want to look in their list of things for appeals and click on property appeals. That's going to bring you to this screen, and you're going to go over to the methods of appeal. The first one they have is online filing. You want to scroll down. The online filing, they'll have the online services link. You click on that. That's going to take you to the online, the link to be able to start the online filing. Down at the bottom, you'll see where it has the 2022 appeal form. You're going to click on that to be able to pull up a PDF of the appeal form. And that's going to be, you can fill it in, or you can just print it out and write in what you want. If you can't do that, you can do a letter that says you're appealing the tax, but you have to be sure that you're getting all the information in it that you need to. And so that's why the appeal form is easier, because it has all the blanks that you fill in right there, instead of having to make sure that you have everything in your letter. This is what the appeal form looks like. We've added some highlighting, but otherwise this is actually what they have on the website. The basic information that you have to put in there is the owner's name, the address of the property, the contact information for the person, the property ID number or the parcel ID number. And my intern texted me a little while ago saying that I need to point out that the parcel ID number that's in the notice of assessment includes a bunch of dashes. The one they use on the in the website doesn't. On this form, it doesn't matter which way you have it. I'll talk about it more when we talk about the online appeal form, though. You want to also put what grounds for appeal. And again, we had this question earlier. You want to check every ground that for appeal that applies. So if you want a value appeal, a uniformity appeal, and or an exemption denied, you want to check each of those that applies. You also want to put down your owner's opinion of value. This is the value that you're asserting that your home should be valued at. And you do want to fill that in. And you want to try and lowball it at this stage. You can put in a value here and then change your mind about what you want to argue for later in the process. So for example, when you show up for the Board of Equalization, if you realize that, really, I can't justify the value that I put down, like say you put down like last year's value and you say, you know what, it actually has gone up from last year, but I just don't think it's gone up as much. You can argue for a different value at the Board of Equalization hearing than what you have in your appeal. That's fine. But you want to kind of lowball it here, because I'll tell you a little bit later about the 180-day rule that could mean that you get whatever you put down here. It's a very rare thing, but it could happen. So you want to lowball it. You want to be sure to sign the form. And they're very strict. If you're going to be doing an appeal for someone else, or if you're going to have someone else do your appeal, they're very strict about getting a letter of authorization to accompany the appeal. So you want to, if it's not the property owner that's doing the appeal, you're going to need to deal with that piece of it. Now, somebody asked earlier about the arbitration. We actually recommend, so there are three ways that you can have your appeal heard. One is the Board of Equalization, one is an arbitrator, and the other is a hearing officer. We recommend Board of Equalization simply because it is available for all types of appeal. It doesn't limit the type of appeal or the value of the property, and it's free. The others may have some charges that apply. So we think the Board of Equalization is a good way to go. The other thing you can do on here is you can actually specify what your billing preference is. If you don't put anything, they're going to say that temporary tax bill that comes out after your appeal, or after your bill is filed, that temporary tax bill is either going to be 85% of the value or last year's value, unless you put something different. If you decide that you want to go with 100% value, which means that they're going to do your tax bill based on the full value in your notice of assessment, if you're comfortable with that, you can do that. And then at the end, if it turns out the value is lower, they will refund you the difference. But I like the 85% mostly because it allows you the time to save up. So, you're probably going to be seeing an increase from last year's value. So probably the amount of taxes that are owed at the end are going to be a little bit more. But you can just be saving and have that money on hand so that when you finish the appeal, when you get that final bill, you'll have that money to be able to pay it. Because I do think that the online process is going to be, it has the advantage of being able to prove that you actually filed it right away. I'm going to real quickly go through what the online process is for filing the appeal. It does require a login. Basically, you go to online services. It's going to take you to this online services page where you click this link to access SmartFile. SmartFile is the system that they use. If you've used SmartFile in the past, like if you filed for an appeal or in the past several years, or if you've filed for your homestead exemption online, you may already have a login, in which case you just put in your email and your password and you log in. If you don't have an account, you are going to need to have an email that you can access, because what's going to happen is you're going to put in an email address and a password is going to send an email to that email address. You need to go to that, click the link to verify it, and then go back and log in. So, so you do have to have an email address to be able to do the online application. You're going to, once you're in, you're going to go to available filings, click on the appeals for residential or commercial real property. You're going to click begin filing. You're going to insert your property ID number. And here, this is where they get kind of persnickety on what that parcel ID number looks like. What's in your notice of assessment may have a bunch of dashes in it. You want to drop those. You're basically just going to put the number that without any of those dashes or spaces, and it should be able to pull up your property. It may require a space after the first two numbers because there is, so this example is 17-01. There are some that are like 09F and then some more numbers. And because there's that F possibility, sometimes they require a space. Just put it in, see if it works. What it should do is pull up your property down below. As soon as it gets your property, you're going to click on start filing. And then you're just going to kind of work through the pages. Each page is going to have a next at the bottom. You want to click on that and work your way through the different pages. I'm going to highlight a couple of things that are a little quirky on the online filing. This page, you can see that this actually is most of what you saw on that paper form. There's really no difference here, except when you're doing an online filing, you probably are going to have to do a separate appeal for the homestead exemption versus the value and uniformity. You can see here, it has all of those options available, but that's because I clicked no on the homestead exemption denied. That's what allowed me to then click the value and uniformity. So if you're filing an appeal on the homestead exemption and on value, what you want to do is you want to start with the homestead exemption, click yes. It's not going to give you the option for the value or uniformity. You're just going to walk through the whole thing, setting out your argument for the homestead exemption denial appeal. Then you're going to, after you hit submit and get the confirmation, then you're going to go back to available filings, do a new appeal filing, and when you get to this page, say no to the homestead exemption denied, and then check value and or uniformity for the value appeal. So the rest of it is very much what we just talked about with the form. Again, you probably you may need to file a separate appeal. I'm pretty sure they have the system set up now where you have to do a separate appeal for homestead exemption and for value. Comments. You can actually put in an explanation of why you think your value should be lower. You don't have to, but this is a good chance for you just to give a very short, quick statement of why you think it should be. But I think the condition of my property is such that it should be a lower value. I think that, these other properties show that it should be a lower value. It's an easy way to just sort of set out, briefly what your argument is. It has an attachments page where you can actually upload documents and other supporting like pictures and things like that. You can do that. And if you don't have them handy, you can stop here, log out, go find them, come back, log back in, and you're going to go to my filings and pull up the filing that you started for your appeal. But you want to be sure that you do that before August 1st. The danger, of course, is if you leave it, you may forget to come back. And if you miss that deadline, just because you started it before August 1st doesn't mean anything. You have to submit it before the end of the day on August 1st. And you don't have to upload anything. Again, you don't have to provide any evidence right now. You can wait until your Board of Equalization hearing to submit your evidence. So it's up to you if you want to add these now or later. Do not hit the submit unless you're ready to actually submit the application, but it will make sure that you really mean that. But you want to be sure that if you hit submit, that you do say yes, that you meant to submit it, so that you then get this confirmation page. It should have something that says confirmation. It'll give you a filing ID number. I recommend printing your filing, either printing it in paper or printing it as a PDF so that you have a copy of what you filed, so that, because it's going to be months before you actually have your hearing. It's helpful to have, handy what it is you were thinking at the time you filed the appeal. You can come back and look at your appeal. You filed your appeal. You can come back and look at your appeal under my filings. You can still look at it later. And the message center is going to automatically, as soon as you file your appeal, it's going to automatically have a message that says, congratulations, you filed your appeal. And that is also going to be sent as an email to the email address that's linked to the account. So you want to be sure that you have those. You want to save that confirmation message so that it's clear that you actually did file it by the deadline. And it'll have that filing ID number. So if there's any problem, you can say, hey, here's the confirmation I got. Here's the filing ID number. You need to go back and find this. So it's really helpful. Okay, so that's submitting the application. The next part is going to be kind of what to expect after you've submitted it. I know we're kind of running a little bit long. Jen, do you want me to go ahead and do this and then do questions, or do we have questions on the submitting the appeal piece of it?
I think you can go ahead and wrap this up and we'll save the rest of the questions for the end.
Okay. So after you file that appeal, so there's all this, activity that goes into this short 45-day period. You file your appeal, then you wait. So like this little dog, you just sit and wait. From the date that you submit your appeal, it could be months before this is done. In fact, they are actually finishing up the hearings from last year at this point. So, what we have on our timeline is that we expect the Board of Equalization hearings to be sort of September to March. That was the case. With the pandemic and some other things, I think it's made it much longer. So that they're actually finishing them up later than what they would like even. So what's going to happen once you file your appeal, you'll probably get a letter confirming that they received your appeal. But what you're going to be looking for is actually the county's response to the appeal. The county is going to respond to your appeal with either a no change letter or a change letter. And the no change letter is going to say, you know what, we're not going to change what we think the value is. We're going to certify this directly to the Board of Equalization, and there's nothing that you have to do on that. If you get the change letter, it's going to look like another notice of assessment. It's going to look very similar to that. And if you get that, you do have to, in writing, appeal within 30 days. So you don't get the 45 days you get now, you get 30 days from that change notice to in writing request that it be continued to the Board of Equalization. The advantage of going to the Board of Equalization, of course, is that you automatically get that 3-year freeze if you get to the Board of Equalization. But if you like the value that's in that change notice, I would reach out to the assessor and just say, hey, I got this. I think I can agree to this, but I really want that freeze, and see if they will agree to give you the freeze. As long as they can confirm in writing that they're giving you the freeze, you can accept that value and not appeal it further. You can also, in between, the county's response and while you're waiting for the Board of Equalization hearing, especially when it's getting close to the hearing date, you can reach out to the appraiser and see if you can reach an agreement about the value. But if you do that, you want to be sure that you're asking them to give you a value and the freeze. And sometimes, especially if it's close to the hearing date, what they'll do is they'll agree to a value and then agree to present that to the Board of Equalization, who will then ratify it and give you the freeze. So that's the whole process. The 180-day rule is that basically they have 180 days from when you submit your appeal to give you that change or no change response. If they're not going to do that, they can take an extra 180 days if more than 3% of the county digest appealed, which has happened for every year for like 5 years at least. So I expect that's going to happen again this year. But in order to take that extra 180 days, they do have to send you a notice that that they're going to take that extra 180 days, and they have to do that at least 30 days before the end of the original 180 days. So what I suggest is go ahead and count from when you file your appeal, count the days for 180 days, count backwards 30 days, and keep in mind that if you don't have an answer or the notice saying they're extending it by that deadline, then contact them and say, hey, I should be getting the value that I asserted in my appeal. And this is why you want to do a low ball appeal value, because if they miss that deadline, then you're going to be given, you should be automatically given that that value that you asserted. So just quickly, this is the no change letter. Confirm that it is certified to Board of Equalization. This is what the change letter looks like. Again, it looks just like a notice of assessment, so it's a little confusing, but you only get 30 days. You'll get a notice scheduling you for the BOE hearing. You do have a choice of doing either in person or virtual. So if you chose virtual, then it's going to give you the link for the virtual hearing. If you chose in person, it's going to tell you where to go and when. and you have the right to change that one time. If you, once you've changed that, it just goes back into the hopper and they will give you another notice of when the next one is, and you don't have a right to change it again. So you want to be very careful about using that right. And if you're going to change it from in-person to virtual or vice versa, that counts as your one change. So keep that in mind. The Board of Equalization hearing, again, these are just 3 taxpayers. It's not scary. Before the hearing, when you're preparing for it, one of the things you want to do is to request what the appraiser's comps are going to be so that you have an idea of what they're going to be arguing. You can do that by emailing an open records request to this email address. Again, reach out to the county appraiser to see if you can reach an agreement. But if you do that, be sure to confirm that you will be getting the freeze and get that in writing. The burden of proof is on the assessor's office. This means that they have to prove their value is based in fact. It's pretty easy for them to do that because basically what they're going to be doing is showing what the computer has spit out. So, they're basing it on that, but they may not have all the facts. So that's where your side of the story comes in. You're going to be able to go in and argue why your values are better than theirs. You want to be sure if you're doing an in-person hearing, you want to be sure to bring 5 copies of each piece of evidence. Sorry. And the reason for that is that you're going to be sitting there with the 3 Board of Equalization members, the appraiser, and yourself. So that's 5 people, and you don't have a lot of time to talk. So you want to be able to have them have in front of them the evidence that you're going to be talking about so that they don't have to wait for it to be passed around or anything like that. The outcome of the hearing is frozen for 3 years, starting with the year that the tax year that it was appealed. So, even if you end up with that notice of assessment value at the end, it's at least not going to go up for 3 years. So, in the end, you kind of win, even if you lose. They'll do a decision that looks very much like this. With it will be a notice that you have the right to appeal to Superior Court. You do have to request that it be appealed to Superior Court within 30 days of when you get this notice. The first thing they'll do is actually schedule a settlement conference. The settlement conference will allow you to try and reach an agreement on the value. If that works, then you're done. If not, then it gets certified over to Superior Court, and the filing fee will have to be paid. And I think the filing fee is like $25. So it's pretty nominal, but you do have to pay it. And then it becomes a much more formal process because it will be in Superior Court, and the county attorneys will be handling it for the assessors instead of the individual appraisers. Recap. Tax appeals are your chance to argue to reduce the value. And by reducing the value, you're going to reduce the taxable value, which reduces your taxes, especially when it comes to the bonds or school taxes, where those are not given the benefit of the floating exemption for the people who have homestead exemption. You do want to be sure to present some evidence for why the value should be lower. Give the Board of Equalization some little hook for why it should be lower. The BOE is not scary. And worst case scenario, you get a 3-year freeze. But the deadline is August 1st. You have to appeal by that deadline. That's my presentation. Let's do some questions.
Okay, I've only got 3.
Oh.
We've answered a lot online today. Okay, if a home is jointly owned, does it matter whose name is used in the online appeal?
No. Any owner is allowed to file the appeal if it's going to be someone who's not an owner or arguably an owner. So I guess in cases where somebody's inheriting the property, I still think they have the right to appeal even if they don't have the actual owner because they're dead. But if they have ownership interest, they should be able to appeal. And any of them can. It's only if the person who owns the property is having someone else file the appeal for them that you have to get the letter of authorization.
But only one of them should file an appeal.
Right.
If you sell while you are waiting to, what happens if you sell while you're waiting to hear back on the 180 days? Does the process just continue as if you're continuing to be the owner?
Yeah, I mean, basically you can talk with the buyer about what to do with the pending appeal. they may want to go forward with the pending appeal because probably the sale has included, some proration of the taxes. And so, the outcome of the appeal is going to affect the taxes for that year. So, the buyer may want to continue it themselves, or they may want you to continue it for their benefit. You should talk with them about that. The buyer is probably going to end up not getting the freeze because, if it's an arm's length transaction, then the following year they're going to be reassessed at the sale price.
Right. Is any interest charged if only 80% of the tax is paid and additional taxes due at the end of the appeal?
No, and that's the great thing about doing it is the 85% instead of doing the 100%. Once the final result is done and there's a final value for the property, they're going to send out a final bill, and it's going to be like any other bill where it's going to they're going to send it out and you have 30 days to pay it. If you don't pay it by the end of those 30 days, then you'll start having the interest and penalties that accrue.
And that's all from online. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just reiterate that because that's the number one question I get a year after our appeal workshops is, why did I get another bill? So if you do pay, select that 85% notice, just know that you may get an additional payment you have to pay. So just remember that. The other main thing I get is that sometimes people lose their appeal statement. So make sure you save a copy of that or print it out. Those are my 2 reminders. Any questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, when I find it online, they are asking for actually all kind of documents. Can I just file and fill out on what basis and then take the whole documentation to the Board of Appeals? Or
So Stacey, the question is about the appeal process online, and they're asking for different documentation, the comps as well. The question is if you need to do that on the online appeal, or if you can just bring them to the BOE hearing.
You do not have to file any supplementing documents or evidence with your appeal. You can wait and submit it at the Board of Equalization. You can also reach out to the appraiser sometime in between and try and negotiate with them and provide the evidence then. But the only time you have to provide your evidence is for the Board of Equalization, because that's when they're going to have to consider your evidence versus the appraisers to decide what the value is.
thank you.
Anyone else in person? All right, so just a couple of final announcements. First, huge thank you to Stacey and Carrie for answering all the questions and for their tax expertise. Of course, to everyone that attended here tonight, both in person or on Zoom or Facebook Live. Please, if you get a chance, fill out our survey if you're in person, or if you're on Zoom, it'll be a pop-up in your screen. It's really helpful for us in our programming, so we appreciate that. The second notice is we have an additional program to help homeowners in the West and South Side Beltline neighborhoods pay their increase of property taxes. This is the Legacy Resident Retention Program. So we have some flyers here today. We're going to drop it in the chat and it'll be in the recap email. You can check out the eligibility requirements, see if you're eligible. But again, that pays the increase of your property taxes until the year 2030 for certain Beltline homeowners. So that is my final note. Again, thank you to everyone. And remember, the deadline to appeal is August 1st. Have a good night.
Thank you.